Today I have a story that might make you think twice before you say something, even if it's just a passing comment. It all started with a simple job painting a fence for a neighbor I barely knew. I didn't expect much. It was just another odd job to keep me busy and make a few bucks. But I never anticipated that one innocent remark would change everything. While I was painting the fence, a casual conversation turned into something much more. And then she said something that caught me completely off guard. "If I were your age, I'd invite you in." It was a throwaway line, or so I thought, but the next day she showed up at my door with a decision that would shift everything I thought I knew about boundaries. What do you do when a simple comment turns into a reality you didn't see coming? Stick around to find out how one comment led to something much bigger than I expected. Hey, I'm Ethan. I'm 23 and I'm the definition of living life on my own terms. I don't go to college. I'm not tied down to a career. And I sure as hell don't have any long-term plans. I live day to day picking up odd jobs, hanging out with my friends, and figuring out just enough to cover my rent, or, in my case, my bed at the rundown hostel I call home. Some people think I'm wasting time, but I think youth is meant to be lived, not locked down. Last week, my buddy Jake hit me up with a quick gig. "Hey, my aunt needs her fence painted. She'll pay you decent money, way better than that crap you're doing at the diner. Money talks, man." I told him I was in. I wasn't expecting much, probably just some older lady in an old house with an even older fence. But work is work, and I know my way around a paintbrush. The day came hot and dry with the sun hanging low over the sleepy suburb. I walked through the quiet streets toward the address Jake texted me. The houses here were well-kept yards neatly trimmed. Way out my league. I didn't belong in this kind of neighborhood, and I knew it. When I reached the house, I stopped in my tracks. She was standing there watering the flowers along the porch. I remember thinking, no way this is his aunt. She looked mid-30s at most, wearing a simple white tank top and denim shorts, her long dark hair tied loosely back. Tall, graceful, confident. You could just tell. She glanced up and smiled soft but warm. "You must be Ethan," she said. "I'm Madison. Jake told me you'd be helping me out today." I froze for a second. I had to mentally shake myself. "Yeah, Ethan. Nice to meet you." She laughed lightly like she knew the effect she had. "Come on, I'll show you where the paint and brushes are." The fence was a long wooden stretch bordering her backyard, weathered and in desperate need of fresh paint. "Take your time," she told me. "I'd rather be done right than fast. I'll bring you some lemonade in a bit." I set up my supplies and got to work. The rhythmic brushing calmed me, sun beating down sweat, dripping paint streaking smoothly over the warm boards. Every now and then I caught glimpses of Madison walking past the big bay windows, talking on the phone, reading on the porch. About an hour in, she came out with a cold glass of lemonade. "You're doing a great job," she complimented, handing it to me. "Better than I expected, honestly." "Thanks," I said, taking a big sip. "Got to earn my pay, right?" We chatted casually for a bit. I learned she worked from home, did consulting of some kind. Widowed, I didn't push for details. The sun shifted, casting long shadows over the fence line. I was lost in my work when I heard the screen door creak again. Footsteps came up behind me. "You know," she said softly, her voice teasing but smooth, "if I were your age, I'd invite you in." I froze, mid-stroke, brush still in hand. For a split second, I wondered if I heard her right. I turned my head slightly, meeting her gaze. Her expression didn't give anything away, just the faintest hint of a smirk, like she'd tossed out a challenge to see how I'd react. I chuckled nervously, wiping sweat from my brow. "Is that so?" She shrugged casually, her eyes dancing. "But I'm not your age, so back to painting." And just like that, she walked back toward the house. I stared after her for a moment, the heat of the day suddenly feeling a whole lot more intense. I knew one thing in that moment. This wasn't going to be just another random gig. The next morning, I woke up in my tiny hostel room with sunlight creeping through the blinds. I stared at the ceiling for a while, thinking about Madison's words the day before. "If I were your age, I'd invite you in." It wasn't just the sentence itself. It was the way she had said it, playful, confident, like she knew exactly the kind of reaction it would stir in me. I shook it off and pulled on a worn t-shirt. I had a job to finish, nothing more. When I arrived at her place, Madison was already outside watering her plants, wearing a flowy sundress and sandals. She waved as I walked up the driveway. "Morning, Ethan. Ready to tackle the rest of the fence?" "Morning. Yeah, let's get it done." I smiled back. I worked in the same rhythm as before, brush stroke after brush stroke. The sun climbed high again, and the dry heat settled in. Madison brought me a bottle of cold water around noon. "I figured you might need this," she said with a knowing look. "Thanks. You're saving my life," I joked, wiping sweat from my forehead. We kept our distance most of the day, but there was an energy hanging between us. I couldn't ignore it, and I was pretty sure she felt it too. Every time I caught her watching me from the porch, or as she walked by, I wondered how much of this was intentional. By late afternoon, I was down to the last stretch of fence. The job had gone smoothly, and honestly, I was in no rush to finish. I liked being there. It was peaceful quiet, nothing like the chaos of a hostel or the half-ass hustle jobs I usually bounce between. I packed up the brushes and took a step back to admire the work. Not bad. Not bad at all. I turned around to find Madison leaning casually against the back door frame, arms crossed, watching me with that same calm smile. "All done?" she asked. "Yeah, looks pretty good, right?" I said. She nodded approvingly. "You really did a great job. Better than I expected. You've earned your money and maybe a little extra." I raised an eyebrow. "Extra?" She tilted her head slightly. "How about you come inside for a cold drink before you go? You deserve it." I paused for just a moment. The safe choice would have been to politely decline and head back to my side of town, back to the life I knew. But something inside me nudged forward. I wasn't wired for playing it safe. "Sure," I said easily. "Why not?" The inside of her house was just like I imagined. Modern but comfortable, soft, neutral colors. Family photos tastefully placed but with no recent ones. I caught a glimpse of an older wedding picture on a side table. It told me everything I hadn't asked. Madison handed me a glass of iced tea and motioned for me to sit at the kitchen island. The kitchen had a wide-open window, and the late sun cast a warm glow on the counters. We talked about nothing and everything. I told her about my random jobs, my lack of direction, the way I like the freedom of not having a plan. She listened, laughed, and shook her head. "You remind me of myself a long time ago," she said quietly. "You used to be reckless too," I teased. "I used to believe life was about chasing moments, not building fences." The irony of her words wasn't lost on me. We shared a laugh. Then she pulled out a bottle of red wine. "Feel like staying for a glass?" I hesitated. "I don't want to overstep." She gave me a gentle, reassuring look. "You're not." I nodded and we moved to the living room. The wine was smooth and the conversation even smoother. I couldn't believe how easy it was to talk to her. She was older, sure, but nothing about it felt forced or awkward. As the evening stretched into night, the conversation quieted. We sat side by side on the couch, both a little tipsy, but fully aware of the unspoken tension growing between us. Madison set her glass down and turned to me. "You're a good guy, Ethan. I don't usually do this." "Do what?" I asked softly. "This," she said barely above a whisper, and then she leaned in, her lips brushing mine. I froze, but only for a second. I kissed her back gently, then more confidently. Her hand found my arm, and mine rested on her waist. I don't know how long we stayed like that. The world outside faded, and in that moment, nothing else mattered. The night unfolded naturally, with no rush, no questions, no promises. It was something we both chose to experience for exactly what it was. I woke up in unfamiliar sheets, soft morning light streaming through the half-open blinds. For a moment I lay there staring at the ceiling, the smell of fresh coffee already drifting in from the kitchen. I had no regrets, none. I glanced over at the empty space beside me and then slid out of bed, pulling on my jeans and t-shirt from the night before. I followed the sound of the brewing coffee to the kitchen. Madison stood barefoot in leggings and a loose sweater, stirring cream into her mug. "Morning," I said, my voice still raspy. She looked up and gave me a calm, knowing smile. "Morning." I stood awkwardly for a second, not sure what the protocol was for whatever last night had been. She held out a mug to me. Coffee. Sure. I took it, and we both leaned against opposite counters, sipping in silence for a moment. Finally, Madison spoke. I hope you don't think I make a habit of this. I shook my head. I don't. She glanced out the window at the freshly painted fence. You're easy to talk to, Ethan. That doesn't happen much for me anymore. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I just nodded. We didn't say much else. I left shortly after, not because I wanted to, but because it felt right. Neither of us defined what had happened. It was just understood. Life went back to normal, or as normal as my life ever was. I picked up a couple of shifts busting tables, did some yard work for cash, hung out with my buddies at cheap dive bars. But I kept thinking about her. One night, about a week later, Jake and I were drinking beers on the cracked back patio behind the hostel. He was rambling about work and girls, but my mind drifted. You good? Jake asked, noticing I had barely touched my drink. I hesitated. Hey, about your Aunt Madison? He laughed. What about her? I shrugged casually, trying to play it cool. What's her story? His tone softened immediately. She's been through some stuff, man. Her husband passed a couple years ago. Real bad situation before that. Guy was an odd controlling. Honestly, it wrecked her for a while. She's better now, but she keeps to herself. I listened quietly, not saying a word. Why? Jake asked, squinting at me. Just curious. I lied. Inside something clicked. Madison's calmness, the occasional sadness behind her strong smile. How she'd seemed so composed but distant at times. It all made sense. She hadn't just been alone lately. She had probably been lonely for a long time. The next afternoon, I found myself walking the same quiet streets back toward her house. I didn't plan it. I told myself I just happened to be in the neighborhood, but that was a lie. I stood at her gate for a solid 2 minutes, debating whether to knock. I didn't want her to think I was expecting anything or pressuring her for more than she was willing to give. I knocked anyway. Madison opened the door wearing jeans and a plain blouse, her hair tied loosely. She looked surprised, but only for a second. Ethan, hey. I held out the flowers awkwardly. I thought you could use these. She laughed softly, shaking her head. You're impossible. But she took the flowers softly. Come in. I stepped inside. The house smelled faintly of vanilla and fresh laundry. We settled at the kitchen table, the bouquet in a small glass vase between us. There was a long pause before she finally spoke. I didn't expect you to show up like this, she said. I didn't expect to either. I admitted, but I've been thinking. I needed to talk to you. Madison leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest, waiting. I know this probably wasn't supposed to be anything, I started, and I'm not asking for anything big or complicated. I'm not that guy. I know I'm young. I know you've been through more than I can even imagine. But I guess I need to understand where we stand. I just don't want to mess this up, whatever this is. Her expression shifted again, this time to something I couldn't read. She stared at the vase for a long time before finally speaking. You are young, Ethan, she said quietly. Too young to be dealing with someone like me. My life is messy, my past is heavy. My kids barely speak to me. My marriage, it left scars that don't just fade. I sat in silence, letting her words land. She sighed. You shouldn't have to carry someone else's baggage at 23. It's not fair to you. I nodded slowly. You're right, it's not. But I'm not asking to carry anything, I said. I'm just saying I like spending time with you and I care enough to ask what you want. She smiled faintly, a little glassy now. What I want? She exhaled. I want simple. I want no drama, no expectations, no rules. I don't want to worry about whether you'll text or if you'll show up. I don't want to question if I'm too old for this or if you'll wake up one day and realize this is a mistake. I smiled. You want real but light. Exactly. I can do that. We sat there for another long pause, neither of us needing to fill the space. Madison reached for a glass of water. You know we can't have anything serious, right? I nodded. I know. I mean it, Ethan. No expectations. You live your life. I live mine. We enjoy what we have when we have it, and when it ends, we walk away with no regrets. Understand, I said, and honestly, I think that's exactly what I want too. Her shoulders relaxed. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. Good. Because for a minute there, I was worried you were going to say something ridiculous like you wanted to date me officially. We both laughed. The tension between us eased instantly. That night I didn't stay. I hugged her at the door. The kind of lingering hug that said everything words couldn't. We both knew what we had wasn't traditional. It wasn't even logical, but it worked. As I walked back down her street toward my usual chaos, I felt strangely grounded. I wasn't tied down, and neither was she. It was the first time in a long time where something undefined actually made sense. Weeks turned into months. My life stayed chaotic in the best way. Working odd jobs, crashing at the hostel, meeting up with my friends at cheap bars, and barely keeping my phone charged. But Madison became this quiet, steady undercurrent to it all. We never talked about us. There was no label, no expectation. She never asked where I was when I wasn't there, and I never questioned if she was seeing anyone else. We saw each other when it worked. Some weeks I stopped by twice. Other times a whole week went by without contact. It never felt weird. Sometimes I'd help her with little things around the house, change a light bulb, fix a loose cabinet door, or lift boxes from her garage. Other times we'd just sit on her back porch sipping wine or iced tea, talking about everything and nothing. Madison had this way of making you feel calm even when everything else in your life was a mess. I started to realize that I liked the simplicity of what we had. It didn't complicate anything. One Saturday afternoon I showed up at her house after a landscaping job. I was sweaty, covered in dirt, probably smelling like grass and gasoline. Madison opened the door wearing an oversized button-up shirt and leggings, her reading glasses still resting on her nose. She laughed when she saw me. "You look like you fought a lawnmower and lost." I grinned. "Might have." She stepped aside to let me in. "You want a shower?" I shook my head. "Nah, I just stopped by to say hi. I got plans later." She nodded knowingly. "It's okay, I'm not your girlfriend, remember?" I winced a little. Not because it hurt, but because she was right. That had always been the deal. I walked over to the kitchen island and leaned against it while she poured me a glass of water. "Madison," I said softly. She looked up. "I'm thinking about moving soon," I said. "There's this cheap apartment across town. It's still crap, but it's better than the hostel. I've been saving." Her expression didn't change. She simply nodded and smiled. "Good. You deserve something better than that bunk bed life." I hesitated. "It'll mean I won't be around this side of town much?" I figured there wasn't any sadness in her voice, just understanding. She was exactly who I thought she was. Independent, grounded, realistic. I took a long sip of water. This was never supposed to be permanent. "Was it?" I asked. "No," she said softly. "And that's what made it perfect." I set the glass down and walked over to where she was standing. I kissed her on the forehead. She closed her eyes and smiled. "Thank you," I whispered. "For what?" "For giving me something good with no pressure for letting me be me." Madison reached up and touched my cheek gently. "And thank you for reminding me what it felt like to be wanted again, even if just for a while." We stood there for a moment longer. Two people who had filled a gap in each other's lives without ever needing to label it. Finally, I stepped back. "I should go," I said. She nodded. "I know." I walked toward the door, then turned back one last time. "You'll be okay. I've been through worse." She smiled. "Go live your life, Ethan. Don't settle too soon." I smiled back. "I won't." And with that, I walked out the door. The sun was setting as I made my way down the familiar street one last time. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel regret. I felt exactly the way we had promised each other we would free. It wasn't a love story in the traditional sense. There was no big fight, no tearful goodbye, no dramatic twist. Just two people crossing paths at the exact moment they needed each other and then moving on. No strings, no regrets, and honestly, that was enough. So, was that moment a simple flirtation or was it something deeper? Maybe I overthought it, but the reality is it was a line that shifted everything. Her name might have said it casually, but I could feel the weight of her words. Was she just testing the waters, or did she actually want something more? And when it all came down to it, I was the one left trying to figure out what it all meant. Here's the real question. Is it ever okay to blur the lines between professional and personal? Should we be cautious about how we let our words or even our silence affect others? And what about the idea of crossing boundaries in such a subtle way? Does that ever turn into something that's just too complicated to handle? Let me know your thoughts. Do you think I did the right thing by keeping it casual, or should I have called out the tension when I felt it? Was this just a moment that got blown out of proportion, or was it something that could have turned into more than I expected? Don't forget to follow me if you want more stories that make you question the things we say and do. Your support is what keeps me going and motivates me to share even more. Or hey, if you enjoyed this, just hit the number one key to show me some love.